Welcome back to the Namsoft 68 channel. Today we're breaking down Operation Cochise Green 2, a multi-day historical simulation that tested every ounce of gear, discipline, and endurance we brought to the field. So if you want to know what hardcore historical milsim actually looks like, let's run through the jungle. For historical context, we have to go back to the spring of 1968, when the war had shifted once again. Following Operation Patrick, U.S. forces were redeployed from the Central Highlands to the coastal plains of the Bin Din province, where the 173rd Airborne Brigade took over the mission. Beginning March 30th, 1968, elements of the 503rd Infantry Regiment moved into the region tasked with securing the area and continuing the campaign of pacification. What followed became known as Operation Cochise Green, and that grim history was the foundation of what we were stepping into. Back to the present, setting up for that reality started on Tuesday with a race against the weather. I managed to get my shelter put up before the rain hit. My shelter was comprised of 2 USGI ponchos made into an A-frame. By nightfall, it had rained for about 2 hours, and there were about 8 of us on site. And most of us slept pretty decent. I actually slept pretty well, and I got up the next morning ready to go. Wednesday and Thursday were all work. We broke ground on our fighting positions, sinking shovels into the earth and filling sandbags to reinforce the walls. Once my own was squared away, I jumped in to help my squad mates dig out and fill sandbags for their positions as well. Then we cleared trails and lanes through the brush, opening up movement between positions and preparing the perimeter. But dinner offered a quiet break, a can of chunked chicken breast heated over my sea ration stove. It wasn't that great. Friday morning, the platoon had finally assembled. Formation was at 0730, final briefs, gear checks, and then we stepped off into the green. I was assigned to the headquarters element as their RTO, or radio telephone operator. That lasted about 10 minutes though, because while crawling around in the heavy brush, my antenna snagged and sheared clean off my radio, because I bow-finged it and that was my fault. Just like that, my comms were completely gone. And I transitioned back to being a rifleman very fast, and was pushed into Squad 1-1. We pushed through towards the tower, moving through thick vegetation while our squad leaders worked exactly as they should, keeping our spacing, hand signals, movement, discipline, everything. And then we reached the clearing. Everything went quiet. No birds, no wind, just silence. And that is when an RPD opened up from across the tree line. Moving near the front of the file, I was about the third guy down when the point elements were hit almost immediately. And while we were reacting, concealed forces took our flanks. The entire squad was wiped out in a matter of seconds. There was nothing heroic about it. No dramatic last stand, no cinematic victory. One moment you're moving through the jungle with your squad, and the next you're down in the dirt. And that was the first real reminder of what this event was trying to recreate. War isn't a movie. You don't always get a warning, and you don't always get a chance to react. Sometimes it's just over. We made it back towards LZ Twiggy, but there wasn't much time to recover before small arms fire erupted around the perimeter. We turned around and went hunting. In the ensuing firefight, I took a hit. And this wouldn't be the first or the last, because I got hit quite a bit. But finally a medic bandaged me up and cleared me to get back into the fight. Soon after, we pushed out on a sweep near the main supply route, and that's when a new problem surfaced. Squad 1-2 had vanished, and the radio I had been assigned could not reach the talk. So we sent a recon element to track them down. Eventually, they were recovered, and then we settled into our fighting holes for a long night of guard duty. And that's where the atmosphere shifted entirely. That night, I cooked shells and cheese in the foxhole, and after everything we'd been doing, it might as well have been a 5-star meal. But once the darkness settled in, visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet beyond my position. We were firing towards unseen noises punctuated by the occasional heavy thump of our mortar. a sparing counter-battery effort that still managed to catch a few of the Pavan infiltrators. Then, around 2200, word came around that Pavan forces were getting into our positions. GIs were being grabbed out of the darkness and silently taken out with rubber knives. And that wasn't something I was prepared for, because that is terrifying. So for the next hour and a half, every snap of a branch and phantom footstep in the pitch black demanded absolute focus. And you were exhausted, drenched in sweat, and staring into absolute darkness, knowing someone could be closer to you than you realized. And that feeling stayed with us. Saturday morning came early. I joined Squad 1-3 for a patrol tasked with establishing a command post off the main supply route, and predictably the jungle had other plans. We walked into another ambush. I treated a couple of wounded GIs before taking a hit myself. When the shooting had stopped, only one man from our patrol was left standing. A quick reaction force stabilized the situation, and I joined another sergeant looking for the once again missing Squad 1-2. We couldn't find them. Eventually, they returned on their own, and the entire force established a 360 perimeter at B.A.E. Then the fighting started again, and I managed to bandage a few more of my downed squad before the entirety of the platoon was taking fire. Once we managed to break contact and tried to return to base, we ran into another ambush. This time, we were pinned on an exposed roadway between two massive fields of high grass. Pavan rifles were working both of these flanks, and there was no comfortable direction to move. There was just the kill zone that we had to get through, and somehow we managed to break that contact, and we made it back to the LZ. We redistributed ammunition from our captured caches and returned to our fighting holes and prepared for one final night. But the final night would be worse than the first, and it felt 2 times as long. Pavan Grenadier spent several hours trying to get an RPG into our mortar pit. We couldn't get eyes on him. He was somewhere out there in the darkness, constantly moving, constantly threatening the position. And finally, hostile forces had infiltrated into our camp, and they were using our own sleeping areas to move around. They were taking guys out left and right with their rubber knives, and then around 2300, I heard footsteps coming towards my position. I turned in an attempt to identify whoever it was, and before I could turn my rifle, a burst hit me. I was helpless as the Pavan riflemen moved further into the moonlit camp. Eventually the medics reached me and patched me up, and somehow I made it through the night. The final day was a miserable grinding slog through choking brush and exhaustion. Our objective was the tower, which the Pavan had taken back, but every single yard had to be violently contested against a relentless series of ambushes. By this point, I was completely worn down, moving purely on grit and adrenaline, dragging myself forward, dumping rounds into the tree line, slapping bandages on bleeding teammates, and trying desperately to hold the line together. But we were pushing too hard and were too exposed, into a wall of fire. And just 10 yards short of the objective, a heavy burst caught me square in the brush. I collapsed into the mud, listening to the skirmish move around me, waiting for a medic who was already pinned down elsewhere. There was no recovery coming. The life just leaked out into the dirt alongside another GI who had gone down beside me. The operation was over. And that's the reality of an operation like Cochise Green. It's confusion, exhaustion. It's the anxiety of the deep darkness that fills the jungle at night. Historical simulations like this allow us to experience the Vietnam War in a way that books and movies just can't possibly convey. Special thanks to Broken Arrow Events for providing such an experience, and thank you all for watching.